Hi everyone, and welcome to the real-time coloring video of this complete card, basically, because I did all the background coloring with watercolors and the character in markers, and there's a lot of coloring here. But yeah, let's get into it. By the way, if you want to see a sped up version instead of the real-time version, you can always hop onto the card making video. All the clips and everything is in there, so it's not separated or anything. However, it is sped up by like 500 times, or not 500 times, 5 times, 500%. But if you want to see the real time, just stay here. The other one is linked in the description, up in the right corner, and on the blog. So let's start with this. This is a Make It Crafty image. He is called Sam's Lizard, or she. Sam can actually be a she, a cute little short head she here. I'm starting off with the skin. I like doing the skin first because I have gotten used to knowing about how much shadows I need to do the skin. But I do recommend, if you are new to Copic coloring, usually either you color the skin and then color the character and then maybe go over the skin once more, or you color the rest of the things, because very often you will color the skin much lighter than it needs to be, because you don't have any other colors around the character, and therefore you will really feel that I'm going way too much darkness. But when you get the colors into the rest of the character, you will see that it will kind of color it relates to each other. So if when you put color next to each other, they will kind of blend and do fun things, which I really enjoy. But I always start with the skin, or mostly start with the skin, and this is because I am hopeless with accidentally touching my marker into other colors, and the skin is usually one of the lighter ones in the image, and therefore if I touch the hair that is colored with my skin markers, I will pull out the brown into the face and I will ruin the image. So I usually do the skin first, because I'm clumsy. The skin I'm using today, and which I use most of the times, and the reason why I do it is because it really is my go-to colors. I know they are easy to blend. It's very similar to my own color scheme. I'm very pale, but also most of the time nowadays I'm more concentrating on kind of figuring out how I want the whole character to look, like the color schemes of the clothes, and what I want to kind of centerpiece, and then the skin is just kind of a piece of him and not so much what I want to focus on, and therefore I just go into the kind of base colors that I usually use because it's very simple. But the colors I'm using is, for the lightest, E50, and the reason why I'm using E50 is because it has a yellow undertone, and when you look at shades and highlights, so highlights are usually towards the yellow. In skin you usually have more of a yellow tone, while for your deepest shadow you have more of a purplish tone, and then you have a mixture of browns and pinks in between. So that's kind of how Caucasian skin works. If you actually go and look at darker skin, especially if you look at really dark skin, you will see that you will have more purples, much more purples. You have a much darker purple as your base, and the highlights are still towards the yellow. They are still towards that tone when you look at a skin. So that's why I'm using E50 for the brightest. Then I kind of go in I do E00 because it's one of the lighter tones I do have in my markers, because not all colors comes in that lights. Not everyone has, like the zeros are always the lightest tones. And also that one is more of a neutral tone. There are other ones that go a little bit more pink. Then I go to the E21, which is this skin, which is called with this tone. It's called Baby Skin, Baby Skin Pink. It might be one of the markers they changed names, because they did change names of a whole bunch of markers, and I have the old names on my markers because I bought them before they changed them. Anyhow, this is my mid-tone. This is basically the color we can say is the tone of the skin of these characters. This is also the last tone I use to build up the nose. So I'm using doing a little bit kind of a triangular, or either you look it as a little triangle or like a half moon sort of underneath the nose, and that is in the E04. Then I kind of make 2 little teeny tiny lines and a little bit of blending on the sides with the E11, and then I go in with the E21 and do the last lines almost. Sometimes I do, but almost kind of getting them to touch each other on the top, and then you have just the little teeny tiny highlight, which I then kind of dab with the E50 just to make it not white. So that is how I made the nose. I really love the nose on this one. It really stands out like a little button nose, and yeah, sometimes the coloring that you're trying to do actually pays off. But yeah, what did I know? Yeah. Then I'm going in with R32 for the cheeks, and R32 is one of those really strong pinks, but when you go over with the R30, it will blend out really beautifully into the cheeks, and the more R32 you use, the deeper redder are the cheeks. The lesser you use, you can just dab teeny tiny on the edges and then blend it out with the R30, you get a lighter pink. But the R32 is really awesome for that. And I also added a little bit of R30 to the hands, the elbow and the ears. Sometimes I do it on the nose and a little bit on the chin. It all depends on how the character looks. In this case, I think I added a little bit to the nose, but nothing in the rest, because those are areas where humans usually have a little bit more pink speckling. Then I'm using the B63 for the darkest shadows on the eye whites and the teeth, and I blend it very carefully with the B60. It's just a little bit of extra tone. It's teeny tiny, it's just a little detail, but it does bring a lot together. Then we're going for the brown eyes with the E40s, and most of this image will actually be E40s. So start by just giving like small U shapes up in the corners with the 49. With the 47, I actually also do a little sweep around the pupil. Then I'm doing 2 U shapes with the E44. Kind of just blend that down, leaving just a little bit of a pearl at the bottom, and I did that with the E43, and then go in with the E42 and blend that on top, and that kind of makes the eye have more dimension. If you look at your ammonia eye, you will see that your eye will not be flat. It's actually kind of concave. The colored piece of your eye will be a little bit concave. Is it concave? Well, it will look like it's going in a bowl shape in towards your eyes. So that is how I'm trying to color his eyes. For the hair, and my printer gets the idea that it wants to sound again. I'm sorry if you can hear that. The hair, I'm using the E40s again. In this case, I want the little lizard to be the kind of focal point of the whole thing. So he is going to be the little bit of color that I'm using in this. I know brown is a color, the skin is a color, but they are very neutral colors. While I'm going to be doing a bright green lizard, because bright green lizards are awesome. Sorry, it's getting late over here, but it's like 30 degrees outside, so going to bed right now, nah. So I'm gonna do a voiceover instead, hour-long voiceover, because I hope you like it. When I start off with his hair, because it has all of these little fluffs and tufts and stuff, I want to make a little bit more of a stripier hair than I usually do. I've been doing very much kind of bigger, thicker tufts, and in this case I want it to be a little bit more strandier. So I start with like adding some darkness to the tips, and wherever the hair overlaps, I also adding the kind of shadow tone, which is the E44 in this case. I add a little bit of the E44 at the base of his head, or at the top of his head, because that is where he has kind of it's usually darker by the roots, basically. And I also add some of that darkness into his eyebrows, because your eyebrows have a tendency to be the color of your darkest hair. Then I'm blending that out with the E43, or blending and blending. I basically just going over top of it and doing more striping. And by going over top of it, I will kind of pull a little bit of those stripes with me, and that will blend it a little bit. But I'm very careful not doing any circular motions. I'm doing really stripy motions, because that is what I'm after. I'm looking to get a stripy hair, or a stranded hair, at what he has on his head. For my next to last color, I'm using E42, and I'm again pulling out that E43. I'm trying not to go so much over where I have the E44, because that will lighten up the E44 more, and I want to have some of that contrast being kind of saved. And if you know me, you also know that I'm not a super fan of using white highlights in hair. I do it on my platinum blonde, because on the platinum blonde it kind of makes sense, but otherwise I do like to have not too much contrast in the highlights towards the deepest shadows, so I don't want to use white highlights. I feel, for me personally, the way I color and my style of coloring, it makes it look a little less busy and a little more put together. However, if you like white highlights, then do them, because you should color the way you want to color. If it's something you should take away from my coloring videos, it's that you should color the way you feel it looks good. I like having not white highlights in my hair, so that is how I do it. The way I color is maybe not unique, but it is my way of doing stuff. And even though I try to give you tips and tricks throughout all of these videos, especially these real-time videos, it's still a way of having your own expressions. You express yourself through your coloring, and this is how I like it. I like it to be kind of very put together, very blended, and therefore I usually use 4 to 5 colors, because I want to have that really graduate color scheme going over, but that is my preference, so it's just how I do things. I'm bringing down the brown and the stripes on his shirt, because I felt that having brown stripes on his shirt was really something he needed. It also brings together the whole color scheme, kind of keeping that same color going through in multiple places. When you're thinking of color composition, I love using very limited amount of colors. This is how I work, and this is how I worked for a long time. because my color compositions, that's how they end up being. And I love having very, very few colors. But if you like having a lot of colors, there's a few tips and tricks of getting it to look not as busy, because you can have a lot of colors and making it look beautiful, and you can have a lot of colors and you can feel that something is off. So one thing is try to have the same, oh god, what is called, not value, but the other one, it's not contrast either, kind of amounts of grays in your colors, keeping to a color scheme that has the same amount of gray tone to them kind of helps putting them together. Making sure that a color isn't alone, unless you do it like a pop of color, like I'm doing it here. I'm gonna bring in green, and the lizard is only gonna be green because I want him to really stand out. But otherwise, if you add other colors, try to add them in multiple places and try to spread those places out over the image so that they kind of tie in with each other and kind of work together. I love using grays in my images, a lot of grays and a lot of neutrals, because grays and neutrals are tones you can kind of mix and match just how much you want to. In this case, I've chosen to go with a toner gray, and I was very, very specific in choosing this gray, and that is because a cold gray is too cold. It is towards the bluer spectrum, and I'm going for a warm tone, a storybook-esque feel of this, and that is kind of the warm tones. So going with a cold gray wouldn't feel as happy for me. I wouldn't get that thing. I didn't go with the neutral gray either because it still feels a little bit too cold. The toner gray is warmer. There is a warm gray, but I felt that the warm gray had too much brown in it and didn't really match with the rest of it. So the toner gray it was, and I really like the outcome. Then used a couple of different greens for the lizard and some oranges for the eye of the lizard, and you will see things of that in the description down below if you want to know all the pens that I used, including all the polychromos that I'm using for the details. It is in the description and on my blog. Then I'm going to give the lizard a little bit of detail, and I'm actually choosing to go with the same kind of detail that I went with the dragon the other day. And I'm doing these really small, teeny tiny circles, again leaving that little gap before going back and doing it in that gap, making it look like with squished circles there, and therefore looking like the pattern is going around the lizard more than anything else. So and I'm using like darker green for this. Again, I have swatched my colors and then I have tried with my pencils on top of those colors. I'm going in with a little bit of brown to the eye of the lizard because I felt he looked strange and I wanted a darker pupil, but I didn't want it black. And then I'm kind of adding a little bit more of that brown, I think this is the walnut brown, into the eyes of Sam, because I wanted some more details. I wanted like this stripy details that you have in eyes, but because he is a smaller character, that can be very hard to get with just Copics. A well sharpened pencil will be able to give you that details. So I'm going in with my well sharpened brown pen and just adding those teeny tiny details to the eyes. Then I'm going in with my cream colored, again By using the cream colored tone instead of the white, I'm keeping with that softer feeling. The white would be a colder tone, a little bit of a harsher tone. Also felt that I didn't soften up those markers as much as I wanted to, so I'm going in with a nougat pen to just soften up the marks I did in the eyes to make them look even a little more. They actually do get a little bit more dimension this way, and also that little texture that adds that little extra detail. Then I'm going over with the cream pen over the highlights. This doesn't give a lot, but it gives that just a little teeny tiny detail that I wanted to kind of make it pop just a slightly little more. Then I'm taking my nougat pen again and I'm going in and darkening those kind of overlapping hairs, just adding a little bit more dimension into it. If I would go in with the E44, which was the darkest pen, it would be too harsh, so then instead I'm going with a nougat, which is just a slight tiny lighter than the E44, but also the E44, because it's a pencil with or a marker that have pigment in it, every time you go over it, it will get darker and darker and darker. But a pencil only have, if you push it down and you push really hard, that is the darkest tone you can get out of the pencil. You can't get a darker. If you want a darker tone, you need to either base it with a darker tone or just switch to a darker tone. Usually I do base it with a darker tone and then I go over with a lighter tone if I'm going for a specific color. But yeah, that's how I usually work with pencils. However, because I'm working on a super slick surface, I'm just doing a slight teeny tiny bit of detail with that with the pen, and not so much more. So now for the background, I have sketched this up. I used a ruler and I sketched it up. I didn't want I wanted everything to be kind of soft and round, so I haven't gone, you did kind of just lines with a ruler, and then I very light lines, and then I went over and did harder lines without having the ruler, so that every line I made was a little bit wiggly, and that is how I made the little stone, stones. I just went in and kind of made different triangular and square but kind of crooked squares images to look like stones. By the way, I did use kind of sort of a reference. I went to Google and I googled stone wall, and I looked to see how different stone walls looked, and I found a couple of them that I really liked, and this don't look anything like it because I haven't copied it in any kind of way. I just have taken, okay, you would get about this amount of the material in between the stones. This is the amount I think looks good, and then I just went in and made random stones. However, I knew that I wanted the lines to be straight where I had the little wooden gate. I'm doing this with a micron pen. It is a brown micron pen. Some people do Copic work with microns. My microns have a tendency to bleed a little bit sometimes when I work with Copics with them. However, they are water fast. And it might be that I'm going over the micron before it actually have dried when it comes to my Copics. But with the watercolor, again, I'd actually tried this on a separate piece of the same kind of cardstock, and I added some water on top of the lines. I did it first directly, discovered that bled, and then I waited a few, I did another little kind of squiggles, added some water again, and that actually looked really good. So it didn't bleed at all, and I felt like, okay, I'm gonna go in with this. So I didn't want to use a black marker doing this, or a black pen, because I wanted, first of all, I don't have a pen that is as thin as the character, as Sam is, and therefore if I used black, the background would pop more. If it has thicker lines than the character, it will pop more than the character, and that will not give me the balance that I wanted. So I went with a thin pen because I don't have anything thinner as a micron, and I went with a brown. I think I have a very thin Copic pen, but I didn't feel that I wanted the black. I wanted the brown because that will give it more of that Storybook X feeling, and it will kind of fall back into the background a little bit. He's just gonna be placed on it. He is a character that is sitting down, so whenever you do a card with a character that sits down, you want to ground the character where they are sitting. When you do a standing character, you will kind of want to ground them by their feet in some shape or form. I have usually done that by either using pattern papers at the edge, or making sure that the smooching effect paper that I'm doing have that, or if I'm adding a banner sentiment, I add it under the feet so they have something to stand on. With sitting characters, I have made kind of borders that go across the card so the character can sit on them. I have used wooden paper for this. I've used ordinary pattern paper for this. I've done this in many shapes and forms. This time around I wanted him to sit on, actually the first idea was that I wanted him to sit on a like pier, wharf, bridge. I don't know what you in America or you in the English speaking world call it. I went to Google Translate. I got all of the different names. None of them really fitted, so I don't really know. But like the wooden ones where you have your little rowing boat, basically. One of those I was thinking about, sitting by the water. But I didn't find an image on Make It Crafty for it, and then when I started looking at things, I'm like, yeah, but how about a wall? How about, could we sit on a stone wall? And I started googling images for that, and then I just ended up making my own. So I wanted to have a gate in it, like it's a wooden wall next to like a big farmland somewhere that maybe sheeps would go, things that I didn't add in this image, and that was a very good reason. I knew that my character would basically fill up half of the image, where he would sit on the little wall, so I only had the other half of the image to add my sentiment. And I kind of decided that I wanted my sentiment to be a little bit of a bigger sentiment, using one of the Make It Crafty chipboard pieces. So I really didn't want to add too much detail there either, because to make the sentiment stand out, if you want a lighter sentiment, you either want a really dark background or you want a much lighter background than the sentiment. So I decided that I just basically wanted a sky on top. I do end up adding a little bit of trees just to get a little bit more, because it felt like he was at the edge of the world and this was kind of the gate to fall off. I don't know, sometimes that happens. But yeah, so I'm going over with the micron pen all of the lines, and as you see, I'm going very slow, and I'm keeping this in this because I want you to see how concentrated and how slow I'm doing this. This whole project took me, I would say, probably 1.5 hours or something like that in actually work time. I do cut out things like switching markers, and this video doesn't contain the kind of card making part, but I did do the card over 2 days. I started with coloring the image, then went and did other things in between, and just had him laying around. I think I did him before I did the dragon. I'm not sure. I might have done him before the dragon. I think I did. And then I just let him lay around, because I couldn't figure out how I wanted to do the background. So this wasn't like, oh, I just realized, oh, now I need to do this. No, I first was thinking about using pattern papers and building up a wharf pier thingy out of that, and I just couldn't. It wasn't like, yeah, this is what I want to do. And when I feel that way, instead of pushing something, I usually just put things away and I start on another project that is completely different, and usually I get ideas when I do them. And this was one of those that I actually got an idea because I did this kind of splotching background with my distress inks, and I'm like, yeah, I want it to be softer. That is what the thing is. That is why I don't want to use the pattern papers, because I want it to be soft and sweet and all of that. So what I did then was like, yeah, watercolors. First I was thinking about, am I going to do with the distress inks? But here's a little tip about distress inks. Distress inks are water reactive. Therefore, they don't layer that good. Because when you add new water, that pigment will immediately react with the water and be lifted off the cardstock. So they don't layer that good. Even if you let it dry and dry in between, letting it dry, when you work with distress inks, you want maybe 1 top 2 layers, and usually you just use the ink and kind of add the shadows with the ink and then push it out with water to get the lighter tones and the highlights. Just doing gradients is a really awesome way to use distress ink with, but watercoloring with distress ink it's quick, but you don't get the same kind of details. Here I'm working with the Winsor & Newton Coatments. Coatments is actually an affordable watercolor set. It is kind of the educational school kind of learning kind of colors. Winsor & Newton have 2 different watercolors when it comes to pans, and they have the kind of artistic one, and then they have the Coatments, and I have a little teeny tiny set. This is colored using a 12 pan set. They have a pre-made 12 pan set that comes in this little travel case. It doesn't have a black. It has like 2 reds, 2 blues, 2 greens, 2 browns, a white, which I do not know why you use in watercolor, because watercolor is supposed to be used with water, kind of, but probably you can use it to lighten up, making things a little bit more grayish. And it has a couple of yellows and stuff like that. So it is really, really nice. I haven't used it so much, but now when I've started to mix the colors, I'm just falling in love with this set. I'm just falling in love with watercolors. And I did this after actually watching a couple of tutorials, both on Skillshare and also on YouTube. If you want to test Skillshare, if you haven't used Skillshare and you want to test it, I will have a link in the description down below. That will give you 2 months free trial to play around with it. If you decide to actually pay for it after those 2 months, I will get 1 free month, just for transparency's sake. That is how my link works. But like I said, you get 2 months free. So you can always try it if you want to, if you want to learn more about coloring or anything. Anyhow, I did do a couple of those courses way back when. I did get one of those like 2-3 months, and I went through a whole bunch of watercolors. This was ages ago. I just started paying for it because I realized they have gotten much more courses, and also I want to learn a little bit more like social media and stuff, and those things are easier to get on one of these kind of platforms than on YouTube. But anyhow, what I learned was that you can use to make kind of grays and black, you use the complementary colors. To get the complementary colors, you can actually just Google color wheel, and the one that is opposites from each other are basically the colors. So two of the complementary colors is blue and orange. And there is, in this set, there is this really kind of almost colder blue. The blue you are seeing here is not the blue that I'm mixing with. I'm actually mixing with one that is a little bit more purple in its tone, but just slightly purplish in its tone. And I'm mixing that with a reddish orange. And as it isn't that bright orange, the mix goes more towards a purple, but because it is an orange and a blue, it actually goes for a very gray kind of purple. And that is actually the color that I mix into all the colors that I'm using in this watercolor thingy. Every one of them, except for the first layer of the gate, is actually mixed with that purplish gray. And that kind of that is one of the very wonderful things with watercolor, and that is, if you do that, if you mix it with that color, you will get a cohesive look all over your color scheme. Just by adding a little bit of that tone, you will, to every color, you will get it cohesive. And yeah, I know I'm repeating myself right now, but I think it's so cool. It's like, I'm amazed. Amazeballs. It just, what? So, I thought it was too much red in the darker brown. As you see, if you look at I'm using an ordinary plate here. I discovered that the watercolor will actually lay better on a ceramic plate than onto a plastic with the little wells in them, or the kind of craft mat or something. But an ordinary white plate is awesome to blend colors on. So that is what I'm using. This is taken from my kitchen cupboard, and as it's watercolor, you can just wipe it off with water, you can put it in your washing machine, and then you can use it again. Yeah, that's how I do it. You might want to use have a separate one for your colors if that is the case. But anyhow, up on the plate you can see a brown and a beige, and those are actually the colors directly out of the pan. So I use a little bit of water and kind of activate the pans. Then I take that color and I put it onto my plate. I wash out my brush. I take new color and I put it on my plate, and I wash out my brush. And then when I've added the different colors onto my plate, I will then pick in between those colors. I haven't put all the colors onto this plate. I just put on the first couple of colors that I wanted to work with. And then I mix them on top of the plate. This means that my pans will be clean. I don't have any other colors mixing in between them, so it's easy to get that pure color out from the beginning. And also I can mix up a smaller batch of color onto my plate, and I can then use that color all over and get sort of a equal amount of color. The brush I'm using here is a Copic watercolor brush. I'm not certain that I really like love it, but then again, I'm not so used to working with brushes that is so not so rigid. The brush on the Copic pens are much rigid, so I'm just trying to learn how to do this, and you are getting to come with me on this journey. I must say though, I have played with watercolors all the way from my childhood up to now. I never really made any pieces with it, but my grandmother was very much into doing aquarels. Aquarels is very, very flowy things with a lot of water, and she did a lot of those, and therefore I got to play with watercolors with her and kind of learn how to do them using like foams to pick up the water, or sponges to pick up the water, to get textures. And I did get to do stuff like that when I was little, like in my round 10 to 15 maybe, but it was never something that I kind of grasped then. And also it wasn't until very recently that I could kind of let go of my perfectionism, and like flowy, beautiful aquarels isn't really something a perfectionist will do. That just, like, I was very, very uncomfortable with it, and now I'm taking steps to get there. I'm still very uncomfortable with the flowy thing, and leaving things be. As you can see here, I'm layering multiple layers on top of that gate because I wanted the gate to be a little bit darker. Just bringing some of that little bit reddish brown on top and just kind of glazing that. And glazing is using a very slightly tinted water on top of the next layer just to give it another tone. Then I'm mixing up some new of that little purple. I'm adding a lot of water. That is me actually dropping water. However, this brush doesn't. This is also a strange thing. Like, for me, a good watercolor brush contains so much water, and it's so easy to kind of get that water out of the brush in a proportional manner. Or that is what I have maybe not been told, but what I thought it would work. And this pen is, or this brush is very much all or nothing. So it's not super easy to work with, because if you have a lot of water in it, you will pool that water. And if you have a little bit of water in it, you will run out of color very fast. So I don't know. But maybe that is how watercolor brushes works. Again, I'm not an expert with this. However, there is a couple of tips I do have, and that is, like I'm doing here, I'm working on a surface that it's dry. All those stones are dry. If you put if you go down with the wet medium next to something that is still wet, they will blend together. But if you let it dry in between, and if you do these very light layers, it will actually dry very, very fast. Then those layers will be really nice to work on, and they will be dry, so you can go in between without worrying about things kind of going over each other. Because that was also a problem I had when I tried this the last time. And that was, one, I was using way too much water, which meant you see there, it's pooling so much, that amount of water. So I actually was a little bit better of not adding so much water to my brush before picking up colors. But yeah, but when I started doing this, I added way too much water, which made it just didn't dry, or it took way too long for it to dry. and me being very impatient, I started coloring next to it and ruined the whole picture. And that was what I did over and over again. However, a little tip, if you are working on a good watercolor cardstock, and a good doesn't mean that it has to be expensive. This is the Canson Montevol watercolor cardstock. It is not the cheapest watercolor cardstock you can get there, but it's a 300 GSM one. It is a cold press, and I really like it actually because it does suck up the colors a little faster than the cheaper does. If you want to go for something more fancy, you could go for, say, the something that starts with A. Arches. That it was the Arches color cardstock. I think that the kind of surface feels like sandpaper, which makes me a little bit uncomfortable to work on. And you can see, you can pick up the colors with a paper stamp like that, and it just disappears and it dries off, and it's good. Anyhow, you can use the Arches one. That sucks the colors much faster, and so far I'm a little bit afraid of it, but also it feels like sandpaper, and I kind of like that this is a little bit softer. I also learned that a hot press watercolor cardstock will be much smoother, and a hot press watercolor cardstock have more texture. This have pretty much or have like a mid amount of texture. If you compare it to, say, the Arches have much more texture than this have, but it's not flat, this paper. It still have a little bit of texture, and I do like how that comes across in the image. You do get a little bit of that texture through everything. So after filling in all of those little things and letting that dry, I'm then going over with, again, a little bit of a darker version of just reddish brown. I wanted to have not the same color that I went over with. I wanted to have a little bit of a different in the color, and usually I probably would have gone towards a more purplish tone to build up those stones, but the image I was watching did have much more red in the stones, and I kind of like, yeah, I want that kind of brownish red tone as my darkest. So what I'm doing here is just adding kind of the a shadow piece a little bit. I'm not being perfect, I'm just going in, adding just the tiniest of details. The only thing I'm thinking about here is to add the shadow so that the sound would be from the upper left corner, because that is how I shaded my character. And if I add a character to a scene and they have different light sources, that will look a little bit strange. So to make them kind of go towards each other, I use the same light source for both images, or the directional of the same light source of the both images, and that helps it tie it together a little bit. So every shadow is going on the lower and right side of these little tiny stones. So I'm moving around the piece when I'm working, and most of the coloring is more towards the top. Usually when I do markers, I try to tape down, and I've learned the marker technique enough to be able to do that. But when it comes to this, I'm still experimenting, I'm still learning how to do it. And a very good way to learn how to do things is actually to move the paper around. And I did that for the lines too, and that is more because I'm more steady in a way, especially for straighter lines, if I turn the paper around than trying to make the line in different angles. And you will have one direction where you get a much steadier line. It's easier to make straight lines, and when you find that, you can then move your paper around. when it comes to my coloring of the characters, the only reason why I tape them down is so that you're not getting seasick. It's the only reason. When I color and not recording, I move the paper around a lot. Really, really much. So I have practiced a lot of coloring on a taped down character just so that I can give you a good way of looking at things. And here you get to see it a little bit crooked because this is usually how I color, and I'm still not used to this medium. So yeah, now we're gonna go in and do the sky. I think I will be doing this guy. I sit here and I think a little bit about where I'm gonna start, so I'm decided to go with the sky, and this is when I take a bigger brush. I think that is a size 10. That is not, even though it's blue, it's not a Coatman. It's from a craft store called Panduro. So it's a Swedish craft chain similar to like Michael's or similar. So it's a very affordable brush. I got it in some kind of set, and I actually really like the bounciness of them, but usually I don't color that much with them. This brush I use very often to splatter things with, but yeah, so I'm picking out some blues because I want to do a sky. And then I'm adding a little bit of green into that blue, just to add, like if you look at the sky, it's not pure blue, it has a little bit of green in it, and that became a little bit too green. Yeah, so we're adding a little bit more blue. And this is how I do. I kind of mix the colors, I figure out, do I feel like this is something I want to have? And then I try it on to my surface. Here I'm adding a lot more water because I want it to be very, very pale, and with watercolors you just add waters. That is also one of the nifty things with watercolors. You don't need like 385 pens or whatever the Copics are these days. You just need a couple of pans, and then you can mix and match how much you want. Sometimes if you do have a tendency to be drawn and use a very specific color, a lot of times it might be easier to just get the pan, because you then don't have to do the mixing if there is a pan in that color scheme. But otherwise you can mix and match just as you want to. Also, this little set that you have seen in the corner whenever I pick out a little bit of color, that little set, as it contains 12 pans, those pans are actually removable. So if you would like to add other colors, if there's some color like white, for example, that you might not use, you can actually add another color in there. And I'm thinking about getting something that is a charcoal gray, nothing black, because black usually don't dilute that well. When you do a really black, it usually have a tint towards something. So if you dilute it, that tint will be more apparent. So I probably want to see if I can get like a charcoal gray or something to get some kind of neutral gray into the mix. But as you can see, you can get a pretty nice gray just by mixing colors. And if you look at the little metallic things, I'm going in with my little tool to dry it, and then I realized it wasn't connected, and I'm like, nah, I'm not gonna use this then. I'm just gonna let it dry on its own. Just add a little bit of more water so that I can kind of blend it out a little bit to remove some of the splotches. I'm going horizontally over the cardstock because clouds have a tendency to be horizontal, and that helps. But yeah, let's get back to those gray little things, where the gate is hanging. And by the way, I just realized that I made the hangers on both sides, so that gate is not openable. Sorry, that happened, but you can probably just lift it and open it. But yeah, No, but I did it in the purple, and then I felt it was way too purple, so I just took the blue and just dotted it in while the purple still was wet, and that kind of spread it out and just had this little layer of blue, and just making it a cooler gray, which I kind of liked. It was very easy to do. Now I'm going in with a very, very light version of the kind of brownish purple. I realized already at the upper part that this was way too light, but I wanted to have the same tone all over, so I'm choosing to just fill in the rest of it with that tone, even though I wasn't really a fan of it. Going in, looking at it, seeing if can I leave it that tone. I'm like, no, I can't leave it this way. I need to add some kind of details to the area behind the gate. So I'm choosing to make it first a little bit purplish. I think I went purplish first. I did like 3 or 4 layers here, so I'm mixing up the colors again. And I'm sorry that you can't see my mixing, but really I wanted to kind of show you more of close up on the coloring, and therefore I couldn't fit everything into the frame. It's super strange on how little area you sometimes have. So I start off because I don't really right then I was like, I don't know what to do with this area. So while I'm thinking, I'm adding some very deep browns just to the like edges and a little bit in it, just to add some texture to the wood. An old gate that has been out for a while usually have cracks in the wood, and those cracks have kind of been filled with moisture, so they have darkened and then have created more cracks, and those are the ones I'm adding here just to give it that little bit of details. I'm using a size 0. This is again another brand of brush. I think I bought this also from Panduro. I don't think I bought it in a set. I think I just bought it singularly, but I bought a very thin one because I knew I needed one for my white highlights when I do highlights with gouache, and it actually worked pretty good to do watercolor details with. So then I am finally, I'm doing this. So I'm darkening down the area because this must be the problem. It's too light. So I'm adding this purple. I'm being a little bit careful with it, not going too close to the gate, because the gate is still a little bit moist and I don't want it to glide in there, but I'm using very little water, so it's kind of dry anyhow. And then it's like, yeah, but this is way too, it's way too little details. I want something more. So I'm mixing this little brown and I start doing, and this is the cool effect. I'm doing this, the purple has dried a little bit, but not fully, but it has dried. And then I'm going in and making these like kind of stone shapes, which I very quickly kind of discover, nah, I really didn't like them, but I continued to make them in the rest of it because I just needed a detail. Looked at it and was like, no, this doesn't work. So I take the color that I've been using, and a little bit of water, and I'm just mixing that color out. It's way too brown for the background. I'm like, I don't like this. It doesn't look the way I want it to. So then I go in with my paper cloth and I remove it. And this is where the magic comes in. Because that purple had dried, but not fully when I started doing the circles, but it had dried when I did the overlay. When I pick it up, I pick up the wetness of those circles, but I do keep a little bit of the purple in the background, so I get a texture of stones without doing stones, and I'm like, yes, this was what I wanted. But we have one thing left to do. I'm kind of drying off. It's very little pigment in this, even though it looks like a lot, it's actually very little pigment. So I'm going over with a little bit of water and just drying off to get a free space on my little plate so that I can blend a little bit of color. And now we're gonna do some green. So I'm going in with my big brush because we're gonna do some very loosey-goosey trees. I wanted to go with the kind of lime green as the base because I'm not super fond of the deep green, because the deep green is strange in this set, or it didn't fit for this specific one. So then I'm going in with the kind of cooler blue. It's the same blue that I used to mix the purples with. And I'm also adding just a little bit of the orange. So the orange red into the blue to get the kind of gray, and then I add that into the green and I get this kind of green, foresty green that I'm like, yes, this works good. I like this green. We're gonna work with that. And then I'm going to do it over to top of the blue so it actually kind of get really even more enhanced and mixed, and I'm like, yeah, this is how I want to do it. And then I'm just doing kind of a forest outline, very loosey-goosey. This is not pedantical at all, it's just very loosey-goosey, but I'm doing it, trying to get the line down to the edge of the wall at least, kind of better. It's just going in there and then doing the loosey-goosey background trees, and that is the finished image, and that is it. I'm finished. So I want to thank you so much for watching this video. If you actually have watched all the way here, whoa, thank you so much for doing it. It's been like an hour. And also, just for funsies, as you have watched all the way here, if you comment down below like saying lizard in the description down below, you will be in the drawing to win this card. So if you say lizard in the comment section below, you can win the whole card, just because you are the amazing person and you actually watched all through this video. So yeah, I ship international. If you're under 18, you have to have the parents' consent to give out your address, otherwise I can't send this to you. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, just hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, please thumbs it up. If you have friends that want to see it, please share it with them. And thank you again for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye!